Welcome, viewers. Witness a ruthless world where absolute power meets deadly famine and dark betrayal. 7 years of relentless drought have scorched the earth, leaving countless nomadic tribes to slowly perish. But deep in the desert, the mighty Egyptian empire stands tall, hoarding mountains of golden grain. Ruling over this vast wealth is Grand Vizier Joseph, holding the fragile fate of all humanity. Now, the very brothers who once left him to die are crawling toward his golden throne for mercy. According to ancient texts, the prophesied famine struck the Middle East with devastating, brutal force. The once fertile lands of Canaan transformed into a cracked, desolate wasteland of sorrow and deep despair. Scorching winds mercilessly swept across the dry valleys, suffocating any remaining signs of life. Entire herds of livestock collapsed and rotted under the punishing gaze of the relentless desert sun. Nomadic tribes wandered endlessly through the blinding sandstorms, seeking salvation, but finding only dust. Kingdoms across the region crumbled as the earth refused to yield even a single blade of green grass. Hunger twisted the minds of men, turning peaceful communities into desperate, starving scavengers. Yet, against this agonizing ruin, a bright beacon of survival emerged along the distant Nile. Historical records describe the magnificent Egyptian granaries piercing the clear, cloudless sky. Massive stone silos, meticulously built by skilled engineers, housed the endless wealth of a nation. Mountains of harvested wheat were carefully weighed and secured by thousands of disciplined royal scribes. Egypt had prepared well, transforming from a kingdom into the world's only remaining sanctuary. At the helm of this monumental economic triumph stood a singular, truly powerful man. Zaphnath-Paneah, the Grand Vizier, held power matched only by the mighty pharaoh himself. Clad in pristine white linen and heavy gold, his majestic presence radiated total dominance. With a heavy golden scepter in hand, he dictated the flow of life and death across the dying lands. Every starving foreigner seeking grain had to kneel before his towering, magnificent gold throne. He was the ultimate savior, yet his cold, kohl-rimmed eyes betrayed an ocean of hidden, ancient pain. He alone knew the devastating secret of his past, buried beneath 20 years of profound silence. What would you do if the people who destroyed your life suddenly begged you for their own survival? This dark scenario unfolded as the severe famine finally reached the distant lands of Canaan. The tents of Jacob, the revered patriarch, offered no safety from the suffocating, dusty wind. His immense flocks, once a symbol of divine blessing, now lay as sun-bleached skeletons on the sand. Deep inside a darkened tent, the frail old man gripped his wooden staff, staring at his desperate sons. Food supplies were exhausted, and the dark shadow of starvation loomed heavily over their families. Rumors of endless grain in Egypt had traveled across the unforgiving, vast, and deadly wilderness. With no other choice, Jacob ordered his 10 eldest sons to make the perilous journey to the Nile. However, the protective father strictly forbade his youngest son, Benjamin, from joining this dark trek. The painful memory of losing Joseph long ago still haunted the old patriarch's fragile heart. Leaving their weeping families behind, the 10 brothers stepped into the merciless, swirling desert storm. Their grueling march across the dunes was marked by blistering heat, exhaustion, and overwhelming fear. Carrying empty burlap sacks and broken shepherd's staffs, they looked like the walking, desperate dead. Finally, the grand architecture of the Egyptian Empire appeared through the shimmering heat haze. Colossal statues and massive stone pillars dwarfed the exhausted nomads as they entered the grand city. They were swiftly escorted into the magnificent Grand Hall, the absolute center of power. The sheer scale of the architecture, built with giant sandstone blocks, was designed to intimidate all. Elite royal guards, armed with polished bronze spears, lined the polished floors like statues of pure menace. At the far end of the vast, echoing chamber sat the Grand Vizier, shrouded in blinding, divine light. Trembling with sheer terror, the 10 brothers collapsed onto the cold stone floor in total submission. They pressed their dusty foreheads against the pristine marble, not daring to gaze upon his regal face. From his towering golden throne, Joseph looked down at the pathetic, groveling figures of his own blood. To them, he was an alien god, a fearsome Egyptian ruler holding their fragile lives in his hands. They could never recognize the terrified teenage boy they had once sold into brutal, dark slavery. Time, supreme power, and heavy Egyptian makeup had completely erased the vulnerable youth. As he stared at their trembling backs, the deafening silence in the grand hall became intensely heavy. The text notes that Joseph recognized them instantly, but cleverly concealed his true identity. Fate orchestrated a poetic and unimaginably cruel twist in this majestic room. The very men who had stripped him of his colorful coat were now begging him for a handful of grain. He could easily command his guards to silence them forever, ending their sinful lives without a trace. Yet, beneath his calm exterior, a violent storm of painful memories began to fiercely rage. The scent of the desert dust on their tattered clothes triggered vivid flashbacks of his traumatic past. In his mind's eye, the grand pillars of the Egyptian hall quickly faded into the dark walls of a pit. He could almost hear his own youthful screams echoing off the desolate rocks of the Canaanite desert.
Have mercy!
He remembered looking up from the mud, pleading for mercy while they coldly consumed their midday meal. The bitter sting of the betrayal, the agony of the chains, everything flooded back to him at once. Would you let go of 20 years of suffering, or would you use your absolute power to crush them? Joseph tightly gripped his golden scepter, his knuckles turning pale as he suppressed a heavy, mournful sigh. The childhood dream, the prophecy that sparked their terrible jealousy, had vividly come to life. Their sheaves of wheat were indeed bowing down to his, precisely as the divine vision foretold long ago. He possessed complete authority, an unyielding power, able to erase whole cities from the map. Yet instead of a swift punishment, the clever statesman initiated a calculated war of the mind.
That was your own doing.
Speaking through a royal interpreter to maintain his disguise, his voice boomed with terrifying anger.
Crimes against Egypt.
He fiercely accused the trembling brothers of being dangerous spies, sent to uncover Egypt's weak points.
12 brothers.
You are spies!
He roared, the sheer volume of his accusation echoing off the massive, towering walls. The brothers desperately protested, their voices cracking with sheer panic as they swore their innocence.
Do not kill us!
They frantically explained they were merely 12 brothers, sons of one honest man from the land of Canaan.
Shepherds, not spies.
One was the youngest, safely at home, and the other, they claimed with heavy, guilty hearts, was no more. Hearing them casually mention his supposed death felt like a sharp bronze dagger twisting inside his chest. Scholars argue this intense interrogation was uniquely designed to test their moral character. Had they changed?
Mercy, Lord.
Or were they still the ruthless betrayers who had easily discarded their own helpless kin? To prove their honesty, Joseph demanded the impossible. They must bring their youngest brother to him. Knowing how Jacob protected Benjamin, this strict demand felt like an impossible, tragic task. To ensure their return, he commanded his armored guards to seize them without the slightest hesitation.
Yes, Lord Vizier.
The sound of bronze spears clashing and the heavy footsteps of the elite soldiers paralyzed them with fear. They were violently dragged from the golden throne and thrown into a dark, suffocating Egyptian cell. For 3 long days, the 10 brothers languished in pitch-black darkness, surrounded by despair and deep hunger. In the cold confinement, the immense weight of their past sins finally crushed their stubborn, arrogant souls. They whispered in the dark, firmly believing this divine punishment was for Joseph's tragic, cruel end. "We are being punished because we ignored our brother's pleas," they confessed in agonizing tears.
With us, and we would not listen.
Little did they know, the powerful ruler who imprisoned them was secretly listening to every word. Standing silently outside the heavy prison doors, Joseph wept as he heard their profound, true remorse. However, the Grand Vizier quickly composed himself, wiping the tears from his flawless, painted royal face. The test was far from over. He needed perfect proof of their loyalty to the youngest, favored son. On the 3rd day, they were hauled back into the blinding light of the magnificent, intimidating hall. Joseph issued a chilling decree. 9 would return with grain, but 1 would remain shackled as a hostage. Simeon was bound right before their terrified eyes, a cruel reminder of his absolute power. They were given grain, but the strict condition remained. Return with Benjamin, or Simeon perishes. The 9 brothers embarked on the sad journey back to Canaan with extremely heavy, burdened hearts. The starvation was briefly solved, but a far more devastating nightmare had finally begun. Back at their camp, another shocking, mysterious discovery completely terrified them. Opening their sacks, they found their silver payment mysteriously returned, resting on top of the grain. Panic swept the tribe. This was no act of mercy, but a brilliant, undeniable setup for a crime. The broken father wept, fiercely refusing to let his son Benjamin face the terrifying tyrant. The food would soon run out again, forcing the desperate family into an impossible corner. Joseph flawlessly launched the first phase of a master plan to expose their deeply hidden, selfish nature. As the brutal famine continued to ravage the dry land, their Egyptian grain slowly vanished. Jacob knew that without returning to the vizier, his entire family would certainly starve. He faced a terrifying and agonizing choice: sacrifice Benjamin or lose his entire tribe. The powerful trap set by the brilliant Egyptian ruler was tightening around their desperate necks. They were entirely unaware that they were merely pawns in a much grander scheme of divine justice. Inside the grand palace, Joseph carefully prepared for their inevitable, frightening return. He ordered his servants to place his sacred silver cup deep within the sack of his youngest brother. This masterstroke would force them to prove whether they would abandon Benjamin, just as they did to him. The 10 brothers had absolutely no idea they were marching straight into a perfectly laid trap. When the silver royal cup is discovered, a terrible, dark fate will hang over their guilty heads. The ultimate question remains: who among them will bravely stand to face the wrath of the mighty ruler? Will they selfishly save themselves? Or will they finally learn the heavy, painful price of true redemption. Scholars describe this psychological standoff as one of the greatest conflicts of the ancient world. The stage is perfectly set for a dramatic, deeply emotional confrontation in the Grand Hall. The fate of the 12 tribes of Israel now rests entirely in the hands of the brother they betrayed. His absolute authority stands firm, casting a dark, imposing shadow over their fragile lives. In the next chapter, the final trap will close, forcing an incredible revelation of the deep truth. Joseph possessed the ultimate power to end them, yet he chose a ruthless, psychological game. Was this a necessary test of morality, or a tyrant's cruel revenge? Tell us below. If you enjoyed this epic historical tale, please like the video, share, and subscribe today.